On the night she discovered her betrothed tangled with her own stepsister in the palace gardens, her carefully constructed world shattered. But refusing to let them see her break, she fled to the annual Moonlight Gala. Running from a fiancé who had betrayed her and from a family that had sold her like property, she pushed through the glittering crowd in pure desperation until she stumbled through the wrong door, or perhaps exactly the right one. Without knowing what lay beyond, she burst into a chamber lit only by flickering candles, where she found a man kneeling on silk sheets, his powerful frame trembling with barely restrained agony. His eyes, molten gold and wild, locked onto hers. She should have run. But instead, she whispered, "What's happening to you?" Having no idea she had just interrupted the Alpha King of the Nightfall realm in the throes of his ancient curse. As their eyes held, something primal awakened in both of them. The beast inside him, which had always brought only pain, suddenly quieted for the very first time. It recognized in her something the king had spent his entire life believing was impossible, a mate who could calm the monster within. And when she realized she was standing before Gregory, the feared sovereign himself, she panicked and fled into the night. At dawn, still convinced she would be arrested for trespassing into the forbidden royal wing, she received a gilded summons to serve as cultural advisor at the palace. And it was there that the reclusive, tormented king began watching her from the shadows, discovering that the only thing capable of silencing his curse was her presence. Until one night, when she heard his agonized roars and opened the wrong door again, finding the king mid-transformation, and her touch was the only thing able to bring him back from the edge. Unable to bear the distance, he tried to force between them. She finally decided to confront him. But she never expected to find him standing at her chamber door at midnight. His control finally shattered, as if he had also reached his breaking point. And it is in that moment that two broken souls finally collide. And as they share the same bed for the very first time, they realize that the real danger might not be surrendering to each other, but trying to survive the curse alone. Chapter 1. The silk of Deborah's gown whispered against marble as she ran, her breath coming in short gasps that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with the image burned into her mind. Marcus's hands tangled in her stepsister's hair, their bodies pressed against the garden wall like she had never existed at all. Behind her, voices called her name, her stepmother's sharp tone. Marcus himself, probably already crafting some excuse, some lie to keep his political prize from slipping away. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The corridor stretched endlessly before her, lined with doors she'd been warned never to open. The eastern wing was forbidden during the gala, reserved for the royal family, but desperation made her reckless. When she heard footsteps echoing closer, she grabbed the nearest handle and threw herself inside, slamming the door behind her. The silence hit her first. Then the scent, sandalwood, and something wild, something that made her wolf stir for the first time in months. Dozens of candles flickered in the darkness, casting writhing shadows across ancient symbols carved into stone walls. And in the center of it all, on a bed draped in silver silk, knelt a man. His back was to her, muscles rigid beneath bronze skin that gleamed with sweat. His hands gripped the sheets like they were the only things tethering him to this world. The air around him seemed to pulse with barely contained power, and when he spoke, his voice was gravel and smoke. "Get out!" But Deborah couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because when he turned his head, just slightly, she saw his eyes, molten gold bleeding into his irises, pupils blown wide with something between agony and ecstasy. This wasn't just any man. This was Gregory, the Alpha King, the recluse who hadn't been seen in public for 3 years. "I said—" His words cut off in a sharp intake of breath as their eyes met fully. The moment stretched, suspended in candlelight and something far more dangerous. Deborah felt it slam into her chest like a physical force. Recognition, belonging, a rightness that defied every rational thought. No, this couldn't be happening. Gregory's expression shifted from pain to shock to something almost like fear. You shouldn't be here." His voice was steadier now, but his body trembled harder. "You can't—" He convulsed, a sound caught between a roar and a sob tearing from his throat. Dark veins traced patterns up his arms, his neck. Whatever was happening to him was getting worse. "Leave!" The command came out as a snarl, his canines elongating. "Now, before I—" But Deborah was already moving, stumbling backward. Toward the door, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might shatter. Their eyes held for one more impossible second, and she knew with absolute certainty that everything had just changed. She'd opened the wrong door. Or perhaps, terrifyingly, exactly the right one. Chapter 2. The memory came back in fragments, sharp enough to draw blood. 3 hours before she'd fled into that candlelit chamber, Deborah had been searching for Marcus in the palace gardens. He'd promised to meet her before the gala began, said he wanted to give her something special. She'd actually believed him, had even let herself imagine that maybe, just maybe, he'd grown to care for her beyond the political arrangement their families had orchestrated. What a fool she'd been. She'd heard them before she saw them, a woman's breathless laugh, a man's low groan. Her feet had carried her forward, even as her mind screamed to turn back. And there, pressed against the ivy-covered wall beneath a stone archway, was Marcus. His jacket discarded on the ground, his hands sliding up bare thighs, his mouth hot against a throat Deborah recognized immediately. Celeste, her stepsister, the golden child who'd always gotten everything she wanted. Deborah must have made a sound, a gasp, a whimper, something, because Marcus's head snapped up. For one horrible second, their eyes met. She waited for shame, for apology, for anything human. Instead, he smirked. Deborah. He didn't even have the decency to step away from Celeste. "You're early." She'd run then, not to escape, but to find her stepmother, to demand answers, to understand how this could be happening. She found her in the preparation chambers, adjusting her diamonds in a gilded mirror. "Mother, I need to—" "If you're about to make a scene over Marcus, don't." Her stepmother's voice was ice. She didn't even turn around. "We all have roles to play tonight, Deborah. Yours is to smile and look grateful." Grateful? He was with Celeste. What did you expect? Now she turned, her beautiful face carved from marble and cruelty. "Love, you were promised to the Ashford family when you were 16. Your father's debts, our house's survival, the military alliance we desperately needed. It all hinged on this match. Marcus agreed to take you despite your limitations." The word hung between them like poison. "Celeste is who he actually wants," her stepmother continued, adjusting a ruby at her throat. "But you are who he'll marry. That's how these things work. You should consider yourself fortunate that he's willing to go through with it at all. I won't. You will." Her stepmother's eyes were flat, final. "There is no other choice for you, Deborah. No other future. You will marry Marcus in 3 weeks. You will secure this alliance, and you will stop being so dramatically sentimental about it. This is what daughters are for." That's when Deborah had walked away, not to her chambers, not to cry, but to the gala, to lose herself in the crowd, to feel anything other than the suffocating truth that she was nothing more than a transaction. And then she'd run from Marcus one final time and opened a door that changed everything. Chapter 3. The letter arrived 3 days after the gala, delivered by a royal courier whose mere presence at their estate gates sent the household into chaos. Deborah watched from her window as servants scrambled and her stepmother practically ran to receive the gilded envelope, her face flushed with an excitement Deborah hadn't seen in years. Whatever was in that letter, it meant opportunity. It meant power. It meant nothing good for Deborah. She was summoned to the drawing room within minutes, still in her morning dress, her hair barely pinned. Her stepmother stood by the fireplace, the opened letter trembling slightly in her hands. For once, she looked almost impressed. "The Alpha King has requested you," she said, her voice strange. "Personally." Deborah's blood turned to ice. "What?" "Don't play stupid. It's unbecoming." Her stepmother crossed the room, shoving the letter into Deborah's hands. "Read it yourself." The words swam before her eyes, written in elegant script on paper, so thick it felt like cloth. The Royal House of the Nightfall Realm formally requests the presence of Miss Deborah Ashton to serve as cultural liaison and translator for the upcoming Continental Summit. Your expertise in ancient languages and diplomatic protocol has come to our attention. You are expected to take up residence at the palace within the week. It was signed with a seal she recognized from history books, the silver wolf of Gregory's bloodline. "This is a mistake," Deborah whispered. "I never applied for—" "Of course you didn't. The king chose you." Her stepmother's eyes gleamed with calculation. "Do you understand what this means? A direct appointment from Gregory himself? Our family will have access to the palace, to the inner court. This could change everything. I won't go." The slap came so fast, Deborah barely registered it until her cheek bloomed with heat. "You will go," her stepmother hissed, "and you will be grateful for the opportunity. Marcus's family is already making noise about postponing the wedding after your little disappearing act at the gala. This appointment could salvage that alliance. It could give you actual value beyond your mediocre dowry." Deborah's hand pressed against her burning cheek. She thought of those golden eyes in the candlelight, of the way the air had crackled between them, of the certainty that had slammed into her chest. He'd done this, summoned her. But why? "The king is known to be selective about his staff," her stepmother continued, smoothing her skirts. "Reclusive, particular. Whatever you did at the gala to catch his attention, you'll do it again. You'll make yourself indispensable." If only she knew. If only any of them knew what Deborah had actually seen in that forbidden chamber. "You leave in 4 days," her stepmother said, turning toward the door. "I suggest you prepare accordingly. And, Deborah?" She paused in the doorway. "Don't ruin this. It may be the only useful thing you ever do." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Deborah alone with the letter and the terrible understanding that she was about to walk back into the wolf's den. This time, she wouldn't be able to run. Chapter 4. The palace of the Nightfall Realm rose from the cliffs like something carved from a fever dream. All moonstone and iron, its towers reaching toward a sky that seemed perpetually caught between dusk and dawn. As Deborah's carriage passed through the gates, she felt the weight of it pressing down on her chest, ancient and watchful. A steward escorted her through corridors that seemed to shift in the torchlight, past tapestries depicting wolves and battles and kings whose eyes followed her movement. The palace was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, cold, sharp, designed to cut. Her chambers were in the west wing, overlooking gardens that bloomed silver in the moonlight. She'd barely set down her trunk when someone knocked, then entered without waiting for permission. "You must be the translator." The young woman who swept in was all wild dark curls and mischief, her gown a deep crimson that would have scandalized Deborah's stepmother. "I'm Lyra, Gregory's sister, and you're far too interesting looking to be just a translator." Deborah blinked. Excuse me?" "Oh, don't worry, I'm not insulting you." Lyra threw herself onto the velvet settee like she owned it, which, technically, she did. "I'm saying my brother doesn't summon anyone to the palace anymore. Not for years. So either you're truly exceptional at dead languages, or something else happened at the gala." Heat crept up Deborah's neck. "I don't know what you mean." Lyra's eyes, the same molten gold as her brother's, but brighter, untamed, studied her with unsettling intensity. "Word of advice? Don't go wandering the East Wing after midnight. That's when the family burden gets difficult." Family burden? But Lyra was already standing, smoothing her skirts. "You'll figure it out. Or maybe you already have." She paused at the door. "Oh, and Deborah. He's watching you. Right now, probably. He watches everything these days, but he won't let you see him. Not yet." Then she was gone, leaving only the scent of jasmine and secrets. Lyra was right. Over the following days, Deborah felt Gregory everywhere, but saw him nowhere. a shadow moving past a doorway just as she turned her head. Footsteps in the corridor outside her room at night, stopping outside her door before continuing on. Once, while working in the library, she'd heard his voice through the wall, deep, commanding, speaking to someone about trade agreements, and her whole body had gone rigid with awareness. During a formal dinner, she'd glimpsed him at the high table, but he'd left before dessert was served, his chair empty like an accusation. He used to love these gatherings, Lyra whispered beside her. Before the curse got worse. Deborah's fingers tightened on her wine glass. What curse? But Lyra only smiled, sad and knowing. The one you're going to try to fix, whether you mean to or not. That night, Deborah lay awake listening to the palace breathe around her. Ancient stones settling, wind through towers, and somewhere deep within, a sound that might have been a growl or might have been her imagination. She was living in his world now. She just didn't understand the rules yet. Chapter 5. It was Lyra who finally told her, 2 weeks into Deborah's stay at the palace. They were in the conservatory, surrounded by night-blooming flowers that released their fragrance only after dark. Deborah had been translating an ancient treaty when Lyra appeared with 2 glasses of wine and an expression that said the pretense was over. "You want to know why he summoned you here?" Lyra said, settling onto the bench beside her. It wasn't a question. "Yes, and you want to know what you saw that night, in his chambers." Deborah's breath caught. "How did you—" "Because you looked at him during dinner last week, the way someone looks at a ghost. And because he's been different since the gala. Quieter, more afraid." Lyra took a long drink. "Our bloodline is cursed, Deborah. Has been for 7 generations." The words hung in the perfumed air between them. "Every firstborn son, every alpha king, inherits it," Lyra continued, staring at the flowers rather than at Deborah. "It starts small, fits of rage, moments of lost control. But it gets worse. The transformations become more frequent, more violent. The beast inside takes over piece by piece until there's nothing left of the man." Deborah thought of Gregory's trembling body, the veins spreading like dark rivers beneath his skin, those golden eyes bleeding into something feral. What caused it? A betrayal. Generations ago, one of our ancestors broke a sacred oath to a witch queen. She cursed his bloodline in return. Every king would carry the beast inside them, would feel it slowly devour their humanity. A punishment that would echo through every generation. Lyra's voice cracked. "Our father lasted until he was 43. Then the curse consumed him completely. Gregory had to end it himself." The glass trembled in Deborah's hands. "How old is Gregory now? 38? 5 years? Maybe less." "There's no cure," Lyra whispered. "No way to break it. We've searched for centuries, rituals, magic, bloodletting, every desperate attempt you can imagine. Nothing works. The curse just takes them. So Gregory has isolated himself, pushed everyone away. He's convinced he'll die the same way our father did, alone in that chamber, lost to the beast, with nothing human left inside him." "Then why did he summon me?" Lyra turned to face her finally, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Because the night of the gala, for the first time in 3 years, transformation stopped. Just stopped, mid-shift. And the only thing that was different was you walking through that door." The conservatory seemed to tilt around Deborah. "He thinks you're connected to the curse somehow," Lyra continued. "Or maybe you're connected to him. Either way, you calmed something that nothing else has ever touched. And that terrifies him more than dying does. Why? Because hope," Lyra said softly, "is so much more dangerous than despair." Chapter 6. The roar tore through the palace at midnight, so raw and agonized that Deborah jolted awake with her heart already racing. She'd heard it before, those sounds that echoed from the east wing on certain nights, animalistic and broken. But this was different. Worse. This was the sound of something dying. Every rational thought screamed at her to stay in her chambers, to pull the covers over her head and pretend she heard nothing. Lyra's warnings rang in her ears. The servants' frightened whispers about the forbidden wing. The way even the guards refused to patrol those corridors after dark. But her feet were already moving. The hallways were empty, lit only by torches that cast writhing shadows on stone walls. She followed the sounds, growls interspersed with something that might have been words, might have been prayers. The closer she got to the east wing, the harder it became to breathe, as if the air itself was thick with power and pain. His door was ajar. Deborah pushed it open and immediately understood why Lyra had looked so haunted when she spoke of their father's end. Gregory knelt on the bed, his body contorted at angles that shouldn't have been possible. Dark veins covered every inch of visible skin, pulsing with sickly light. His hands had partially shifted, claws extending, retracting, extending again. But it was his eyes that broke her. Still human enough to show terror. Still aware enough to know what was happening to him. "Get out," he managed, his voice shredded. "Please, Deborah, run." Instead, she walked toward him. "Don't," it came out as a snarl. "I'll hurt you. I can't control." She'd been studying the ancient texts in the library, searching for anything related to bloodline curses. She'd found fragments of a language older than the kingdoms themselves, words meant to soothe and bind. Without thinking, she began to speak them, her voice low and steady. Gregory's head snapped up, those wild eyes locking onto hers. The transformation seemed to pause, suspended between man and beast. Deborah climbed onto the bed, slowly, carefully, close enough to see the sweat coating his skin, to smell the sandalwood and wildness she remembered from the gala. Close enough that when she reached out, her fingers brushed his partially shifted hand. The effect was instantaneous. The dark veins receded, like a tide pulling back from shore. His claws retracted, his breathing slowed, the feral light in his eyes dimming to something almost human. Gregory's whole body shuddered once, violently, then collapsed. Deborah caught him, her arms barely strong enough to support his weight as he sagged against her. For a moment, they stayed like that, her on her knees on his bed, him trembling in her arms, both of them breathing hard. "That's impossible," he whispered against her shoulder. His voice was hoarse, wrecked. "Nothing stops it. Nothing ever—" "I'm here," she said softly, continuing the ancient words she didn't fully understand. "You're not alone." His hand found hers, fully human now, and gripped it like a lifeline. "Who are you?" Deborah looked down at the feared Alpha King, shaking in her arms, and realized she didn't have an answer. She only knew that something between them was bigger than curses, bigger than politics, bigger than the fear that had ruled both their lives. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I think we're going to find out." Chapter 7. Gregory didn't speak to her for 3 days after she'd calmed the curse. He avoided the dining hall, the library, every space she might occupy. When she asked the servants about him, they looked away. When she cornered Lyra, the younger woman only shook her head sadly. "He's trying to protect you," Lyra said, "in the most idiotic way possible." On the 4th night, Deborah found a letter slipped under her door. His handwriting was sharp, controlled, nothing like the trembling man she'd held in her arms. "You will leave at dawn. A carriage has been arranged. Your family will be compensated for the abrupt end to your appointment. This is not a request." She read it twice, then 3 times, waiting for the anger to come. Instead, she felt only a hollow ache beneath her ribs, right where the bond had settled. Because it was a bond, she understood that now. Something that pulsed between them like a second heartbeat. Deborah crumpled the letter and walked straight to the east wing. She didn't knock. Just pushed open his door and found him standing by the window, silhouetted against the moonlight. He didn't turn around. "I told you to leave," he said quietly, "and I'm telling you no." Now he turned, and the anguish in his eyes nearly broke her. "You don't understand what you're risking. That night, what you did, it was temporary. The curse always comes back. Always. And next time, I might not be able to stop myself from what? Hurting me?" She crossed the room, watching him tense. You had every opportunity. You were lost to it, and you still told me to run. That won't last. His hands clenched at his sides. My father used to beg my mother to leave him. Every day he'd beg, and every day she'd stay, convinced her love was enough to save him. Until the night it wasn't. I'm not your mother, and you're not your father. You don't know that. Neither do you. The silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. Then Gregory moved, crossing the distance between them in 2 strides. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. I can't be what you need, he whispered. I'm dying by inches, Deborah, losing myself piece by piece. You deserve more than watching me disappear. What I deserve, she said, leaning into his touch, is the choice. And I choose this. I choose you. Something broke in his expression. For one suspended moment, he hesitated. Then his mouth was on hers, desperate and claiming. She tasted his surrender, his fear, his terrible hope. They came together like a storm breaking, all the restraint and distance shattering into raw need. His hands mapped her body like he was memorizing it, like he was drowning and she was air. She pulled him closer, closer, until there was no space left between them. When dawn broke, she woke to find him already dressed, his face carved from stone. The carriage leaves in an hour, he said, not meeting her eyes. What happened last night? It can't happen again. I won't damn you to this, Deborah. I won't. Gregory, please, the word cracked. If you care for me at all, you'll go. So she did, because she understood that staying would destroy him faster than any curse. But she didn't go home. Chapter 8. Deborah made it as far as her family's estate before everything fell apart. She'd planned to collect her belongings and disappear, find some distant city where neither her family nor Gregory could reach her. But her stepmother was waiting in the foyer, Marcus standing beside her like a sentinel. 3 weeks you've been gone, her stepmother said coldly. 3 weeks while Marcus's family threatened to dissolve the engagement. Do you have any idea what you've cost us? I don't care. Deborah moved toward the stairs, but Marcus blocked her path. We're getting married, he said. His voice was pleasant, reasonable, which made it worse somehow. Tomorrow. I've already made the arrangements. No. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard enough to bruise. That wasn't a question. Whatever happened at that palace, whatever you think you found there, it's over. You belong to me. Deborah tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Let go. You're my property, Deborah. Bought and paid for. His other hand tangled in her hair, yanking her head back. And I'm done being patient. She fought then, truly fought, but he was stronger. When she scratched at his face, his open palm cracked across her cheek hard enough to make her vision blur. She tasted blood. And then the bond inside her chest exploded with fury that wasn't her own. The front door didn't open. It shattered. Gregory stood in the doorway, his eyes already bleeding gold, his body trembling with barely restrained violence. The transformation was beginning, dark veins spreading up his neck, but his gaze was locked on Marcus's hand in Deborah's hair. Let her go. Marcus released her immediately, stumbling backward. Your Majesty, this is a private family matter. She's bleeding. Gregory's voice had dropped an octave, rough with the beast rising inside him. You made her bleed. The curse surged. Deborah could see it taking hold, his fingers elongating into claws, his canines extending. But she pushed past Marcus, past her frozen stepmother, and put herself between them. Gregory. She touched his face, felt the wrongness beneath his skin. Look at me. Only me. His wild eyes found hers. Breathe, she whispered, speaking the ancient words she'd learned. You're not lost. I'm here. The transformation slowed. Stopped. Gregory's breathing was ragged, his whole body shaking. But when he looked at Marcus again, his eyes were human and absolutely lethal. If you ever touch her again, he said quietly. I will forget every law that protects you. Then he turned to Deborah, his hand gentle on her bruised cheek. Come home. Your Majesty? Her stepmother tried. The engagement contract is void. Gregory's voice cut through the room like a blade. Deborah is under my protection. Now, he paused, his eyes never leaving hers. She's my queen, my mate. And anyone who challenges that challenges the crown itself. The declaration hung in the air, witnessed by her family, the servants, Marcus's pale face. Gregory offered her his hand. Will you come home? Deborah took it. Yes. Chapter 9. The ceremony was held in the palace's ancient courtyard, beneath a full moon, so bright it turned the moonstone walls to liquid silver. Deborah stood at the edge of the sacred circle, wearing a gown that seemed woven from starlight itself. Ivory silk that caught the moon's glow, embroidered with silver wolves that moved like living things across the fabric. Lyra had helped her dress, tears streaming down her face the entire time. He hasn't smiled in 3 years, Lyra had whispered, fastening the final clasp. Not until you. Now, as Deborah walked toward the center of the courtyard where Gregory waited, she understood the weight of what they were about to do. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a claiming, a bonding that would tie their souls together in ways that transcended politics or arrangements, or any choice her family had ever tried to force upon her. This was her choice, and his. Gregory stood in the moonlight, wearing the formal robes of his station, midnight blue embroidered with silver, a crown of iron and moonstone resting on his dark hair. But it was his eyes that held her. Those golden eyes that had been feral and wild the first time she'd seen them, now clear and utterly focused on her. The high priestess began the ancient rites, her voice carrying across the courtyard filled with witnesses, nobles, servants, visiting dignitaries, all gathered to watch their reclusive king finally claim a mate. But Deborah barely heard the words. She was too aware of Gregory's hand reaching for hers, of the bond between them pulsing like a living thing. The bonding requires blood, the priestess said, offering a ceremonial blade. And truth spoken beneath the moon's witness. Gregory took the blade first, drawing it across his palm without hesitation. Then he offered it to Deborah, his eyes asking the question his mouth didn't. Are you sure? She took the blade and cut her own palm, watching crimson well against her skin. When their hands clasped together, blood mingling, the bond flared so bright she gasped. Speak your truth, Alpha King, the priestess commanded. Gregory's voice rang out clear and strong. I was dying before you came. Not from the curse, from the loneliness of it. From believing I was meant to face the darkness alone. His fingers tightened on hers. You walked through the wrong door and showed me that some monsters can be saved, that some curses can be fought. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever, hope. And I swear on this bond, on my crown, on everything I am, that I will spend every day I have left making sure you never regret choosing me. Deborah's throat tightened. Around them she could hear people, weeping. Speak your truth, Deborah of the Nightfall Realm, the priestess said. I spent my whole life being told I was a transaction, Deborah began, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Something to be sold, traded, used for someone else's gain. I didn't know what it felt like to be valued for who I was instead of what I could provide. Until I opened that door and saw you, not the king, not the legend, but the man fighting a battle no one else could see. She squeezed his hand. You were vulnerable and terrifying and real. And you looked at me like I mattered, like I was worth protecting even from yourself. Her voice broke. I choose you, Gregory, not because I have to, not because anyone forced me, but because you're the first person who ever made me feel like choosing was mine to do. The priestess raised her hands to the moon. By blood and truth, by moon and stone, by the ancient laws that bind our kind, I declare this bond sealed. Gregory of the Nightfall Realm, you may claim your queen. Gregory pulled her close, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that tasted of blood and moonlight and promises. The bond between them surged, solidifying into something unbreakable. When they pulled apart, the priestess was offering a second crown, delicate silver, set with moonstones that glowed with their own inner light. Gregory took it, his hands remarkably steady as he placed it on Deborah's head. "My queen," he said softly. "My mate. My salvation." The courtyard erupted in cheers, but Deborah only had eyes for him, for the man who'd been convinced he was a monster, who'd tried to push her away to protect her, who'd claimed her anyway because some bonds were stronger than fear. Later, when the celebration had moved inside and they finally found themselves alone in their chambers, Gregory pulled her into his arms. "The curse is still there," he said quietly. "I can feel it. But it's different, quieter, like it's being held back by something stronger." "By us," Deborah corrected, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "By this. We'll fight it together, Gregory. We'll find a way to break it completely. And if we can't," she smiled, "then we'll hold it back with everything we have. You're not alone in this anymore. You'll never be alone again." He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and she felt the truth of their bond settling into her bones. They had saved each other. Her from a life of being used, him from the darkness that had threatened to consume him. And together they would face whatever came next. Not as king and subject, not as captor and prisoner, but as equals, as mates, as two people who'd opened the wrong door and found exactly what they needed. Want more stories of forbidden romance, fated mates, and powerful alphas? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Your next obsession is just one click away.